name is France Hutchison. Comme vous le savez, c'est notre jour 4 du sommet du coaching 2020. Alors, nous sommes très, très heureux de vous présenter non seulement des opportunités où we're happy to not only offer you coaching conversations with a coach, but also giving you great content. As my role at the Canada School of Public Service, I had a chance to teach the coaching for effective leadership course. And during that course, there was a lot of questions around, can I use coaching in difficult conversation, or for coaching for performance, or for all kinds of context. So I thought it was really going to be important to share with you how you can use the coaching skills that you're learning this week, or maybe what you've learned in the past, and adapt it for a coaching for performance conversation with colleagues or with your employees. Donc, c'est important pour moi dans mon rôle de spécialiste en apprentissage au sein de l'École de la fonction publique. Lors des enseignements dans les cours liés à nos cours portant sur la gestion par le coaching, c'est important. Il y avait plusieurs questions qui revenaient en lien avec est-ce que je peux utiliser le coaching et les techniques de coaching dans une conversation sur le rendement ou sur la performance de mes équipes ou de mes employés. Donc, c'était un petit dilemme et j'ai cru bon de vous inviter cette conférencière-là, coach aussi, qui est Lori Lacey, qui est la fondatrice et coach exécutif et spécialiste du développement du leadership chez Evergreen Leadership. Lori is an executive coach and a leadership development consultant who is passionate about working with executive leaders and their teams and to create high performance outcomes. Her mission is to inspire insight, accelerate growth, and achieve results one conversation at a time. So, I think, Lori, I'll just stop there. I love those powerful words of growth, inspiring insight. And I know the topic today is well in demand in the public service. How do we use coaching in those moments, in those conversations? So, Lori, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, France, for that lovely introduction. And I'm so excited to be here today to talk about this topic. And I think it's a really complex topic that leaders everywhere in the public service and elsewhere, private sector, deal with all the time. How do we coach our staff to inspire them and motivate them to bring their best to work every single day? And when we see them struggling, how can we have a conversation that will help them get better, develop, but also overcome the challenges that they might be having in the workplace. So a little bit about what we're going to do today. My objective is to use the GROW model, which some of you may be familiar with, as that coaching framework. So if we want to have a performance discussion or a difficult discussion with a staff member, what do we do to do that with them? How can we manage their performance, and how can we use that GROW model to our advantage? France?
I have nothing to add here. I was just chatting with people. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. We'll get this down yet, right?
I'll be sharing with the French portion. Donc, ici, l'objectif vraiment de la séance avec Lori, c'est d'utiliser le modèle BROP pour un peu offrir un cadre autour de la conversation de coaching, puis identifier les possibilités non seulement d'utiliser le modèle, mais d'amener les gens à avoir une conversation assez fructueuse, mais en utilisant vraiment un modèle structuré pour aider les employés à se développer et se perfectionner. Alors voilà, je vais faire ma partie de travail.
Okay, so just a quick breakdown of what we're going to cover today. And we're going to first talk about kind of setting the stage for that discussion, and then move into checking in with ourselves as leaders, because we have to make sure when we're sitting down to have a difficult conversation, that we know what's in our own mind, we know how we want to show up, and we know where our blocks and barriers may be. And then, like I mentioned, we'll be doing some application about the GROW model, and then I also have a few tools to support you. And we'll be finishing our conversation with a demonstration today. And I would like to invite anyone in the audience who would like to come on video, has working video and audio, and would like to come on video and be coached by me for about maybe 15 minutes to get ready for a challenging conversation or a performance conversation you might be having. So I'm looking for a volunteer to do that. Please put your name and your interest in the chat box, and Barbara will reach out to you to set that up. So yeah, please come on board if you would be interested in getting coached today.
Alors, merci Laurie. Je vais ajouter en français ce qui va se passer aujourd'hui. Donc, aujourd'hui, on va vraiment partager tout ce qui touche la performance, la discussion, puis on va mettre en place les éléments essentiels pour bien canter cette discussion-là sur le rendement. On va aussi partager un peu comment vous utiliserez le modèle, mais aussi un peu qu'est-ce qui se passe en vous, puis comment est-ce que vous pouvez raffiner votre façon de penser en lien avec la gestion du rendement, puis aussi peut-être des outils qui vont vous aider, vous supporter quand viendra le temps de vous préparer à cette conversation-là. Et évidemment, il y aura une démonstration où on vous demande de participer. On va demander à quelqu'un dans la liste des participants de se porter volontaire, d'utiliser la caméra et de vraiment faire avec Lori une conversation de coaching où votre coach sera Lori, et ce sera une belle démonstration justement de l'application de l'ensemble des méthodes qui vont être enseignées par Lori aujourd'hui. Back to you, Lori.
Thank you. Okay, so let's start by talking about some common performance management issues. So when you think about the challenges that you have with your staff or some of those difficult conversations that you need to step into, I'd like to invite you to put in the chat just some of those common issues. So just put in the chat some of those common issues that you might be coming up with. Maybe it's attendance issues that you have with your staff. Maybe it's folks are consistently missing deadlines, or you're noticing some underperformance. Maybe someone's not a team player. Are you seeing anything coming up in the chat there, France?
Yes, we have lots. Let me just put this in French. Donc, nous aimerions vraiment voir vos impressions de quels sont les éléments avec lesquels vous avez de la difficulté en lien avec votre personnel ou les gens qui se rapportent à vous. Alors, on peut voir, we can see, Lori, a lot of words: accountability, negative attitude, inappropriate attitude, lack of motivation. Attitude comes quite a lot, negative attitude, communication problems, accommodations, not respecting reporting lines. How do I encourage when I'm feeling frustrated? Des employés passifs en attente d'avoir des instructions, pride in their work, lack of follow-up, gossiping, oh gosh, and another one, unorganized, la prise de décision, no ownership. So these are heavy. This has put a lot of heaviness in the workplace when you're struggling with all this. What else is there? Concern with COVID-19 protocols at work, disengagement, communication problems. Do you want me to go on, Lori?
No, that's fine. No. We're getting the picture really clearly, aren't we? That not only are there a variety of issues that we experience as leaders with our staff, but they're similar issues, and they all stem from, a common place, an employee that's not happy, something that's going on, something, somehow they've lost their motivation, somehow they've lost their inspiration to do their best work and bring their best selves to work. So really common issues, France.
Merci. Je vais ajouter en français. Donc, ce que Lori mentionne, c'est que ce sont vraiment des situations qui sont vues régulièrement, le manque de motivation, le bonheur au travail des employés, être concerné par les attitudes des employés. Donc, c'est vraiment des éléments qui sont vus régulièrement par Lori et lors de ses conversations aussi en coaching. So, Lori, I think we have the picture now.
Okay, great. Let's carry on. So this slide is an interesting slide, and I threw it in here, so I apologize that it hasn't been translated fully. But the picture is worth 1,000 words, because one of the things we have to remember is that giving and receiving feedback is difficult. It's difficult for the person receiving the feedback, and it's difficult for the person giving the feedback. And this beautiful visual comes from Judith E. Gleiser and her seminal work in the neuroscience of conversations, and can give us a little bit of insight into what's happening in our brains when we come together with another person, whether we know that person or not. And I'll stop there and turn it to you, France, before I say more.
Merci. Et évidemment, ça sera traduit en français, cette diaporama-là, mais c'est une belle illustration qui démontre vraiment quand on entre en relation avec quelqu'un, qu'est-ce qui peut se passer au niveau de la neuroscience, donc au niveau de nos cerveaux, puis des attitudes de réaction versus quand on est dans un état de stress et versus quand on est dans un état je dirais plus optimal, positif. Et là, j'ajoute un peu d'informations. C'est pas exactement ce que Lori a dit. Alors, Lori, I'll let you continue because I
Sure.
think it's more further explanation that I can add in French.
Sure. Okay. So if we look at this dashboard, we can see that the amygdala hijack, something that happens when there's some kind of conversation or even a single word that triggers a fear response in us on the left side of the dashboard. On the right side of the dashboard, we can see what happens when we're in a comfortable situation, where we're with someone that we trust, when we're working together effectively. What happens is even a short sentence like, or an email that says, could you come see me in my office, from a leader to a subordinate, can trigger an amygdala hijack or some kind of fear response. The first place our brain goes to naturally is, what did I do wrong? Or why does the boss want to see me? And right away, we're not in a safe feeling space to be able to listen fully, think clearly, that amygdala takes over and injects our body with a whole lot of cortisol that puts us on the defensive right away.
Thank you. I think it adds more. Donc, voilà ce qui vient d'être expliqué par Lori. C'est vraiment en regardant le schéma à l'écran. La partie de gauche, c'est vraiment quand on est dans un esprit réactif, ce qui se passe à notre niveau à niveau de l'amygdale, du cerveau. On est vraiment dans un état plus réactif et de manque de confiance. Donc, on peut être vraiment résistant. Tandis que dans la partie de droite, on voit vraiment quand on est dans un état optimal de positivisme et de confiance, on est beaucoup plus réceptif. Et au niveau du cerveau, ben, le cortex préfrontal libère autre chose que du cortisol. C'est plutôt d'oxytocine qui est beaucoup plus positif. Mais dans un état où, par exemple, on est le patron, on demande à l'employé de se rendre à notre bureau, donc que ce soit par courriel ou que ce soit un appel, la réaction quand on est en manque de confiance, évidemment, la réaction est de vraiment rendre la personne dans un état de stress et de ne pas être nécessairement très réceptif. Donc, il faut être conscient de ce processus-là qui est totalement humain, totalement naturel. Et évidemment, Lori, you will explain how we can change probably that reactive response.
Absolutely. So when we talk about that reactive response, it can be reactive on the part of the employee that's being asked to come see you. But we have to remember that we also, as leaders wanting to have this difficult conversation, are sitting somewhere on this dashboard. And we also have perceptions, preconceived ideas, maybe even some anger around something that happened that we're not happy with that person. That's why this difficult conversation is going to happen. So we need to think also where we are on this dashboard when we're sitting down to have this conversation. So that's something we can do when we prep for the conversation. We also know that when people are in a triggered state, our amygdala response is to fight, flight, freeze, or appease. So in a work situation, we can't flee, we can't fight back, we can't, freeze because we've got somebody in front of us. So we appease. And I'm sure that people can relate to, in difficult situations, we will stop and we will say anything. Yes, I agree. Yes, I will do that. And then they go away and nothing happens, nothing changes.
Ah, I love that word. En français, donc, quand vous êtes le gestionnaire et vous avez donc à vraiment vous poser la question où vous vous situez dans ce schéma-là aussi, parce que vous êtes aussi propice à être dans un état réactif ou dans un état de confiance. Donc, avant d'avoir une conversation, toujours important de se poser la question, moi, je me situe où dans ce schéma-là? Est-ce que je suis en mode de manque de confiance? Est-ce que j'ai des émotions négatives par rapport à ça qui vont littéralement avoir un impact sur la communication ou sur la personne parce que ça se ressent? Si vous êtes dans un mode plutôt réactif, les comportements normalement observés sont les 4 suivants. Soit qu'on va être dans un mode plutôt agressif, donc le côté fight. L'autre, c'est de se sauver, donc flight, donc l'expression en anglais, c'est flight. Il y a probablement des expressions françaises, si vous voulez les écrire en français aussi dans la clavardage, ça m'aiderait. L'autre, c'est de geler sur place. Mais il y a un 4e, Lori, that one I didn't know of, that 4th one of appeasing.
Mm-hmm.
Donc, apaiser la situation. Et je crois que, and I will comment on this in English, but I'll add in French, I think this is something that we see more than often, people saying yes, they're respecting authority, but they're not doing anything. And that's what we saw as well in the comments. Donc, un quatrième comportement qu'on voit et observe beaucoup, et d'ailleurs, ça a été mentionné dans le clavardage, quand les gens sont un peu plutôt passifs ou ne répondent pas aux exigences ou manquent les deadlines ou les délais pour les projets. Alors, il y a ce mot-là qui est apaisé. Quand un employé dans votre bureau vous dit oui ou quelqu'un vous dit oui, va faire l'action, mais il n'y a rien qui se passe. Et il n'y a rien qui est livré, puis il n'y a rien qui aboutit. Donc, ce 4e mot-là, that 4th word, Lori, is very, very powerful. That 4th reaction.
It is for sure. And when we hear that, it's information for us to say, okay, this person has been triggered. They're in this kind of fear state. They're not really listening to me, because when that cortisol takes over our prefrontal cortex, the executive or thinking part of our brain actually shuts down. That's why we're known in those states to say things that we might later regret, and enable to be able to get someone to that place of safety. It is really, really important about how we set the stage for this conversation. Otherwise, they're not hearing anything that we're saying. They're just appeasing us to get out of our office as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Lori. I'll add in French, but I invite you to look if you have access to the chat, because there's a few good comments that could lead to a question. Alors, ce qui est important pour le côté apaisé, c'est d'observer aussi que quand on est dans un mode réactif, on est aussi, le pourquoi aussi des fois qu'on va s'engager à dire des choses qui ne sont pas toujours réfléchies lorsqu'on est dans un mode réactif, c'est que le cortex préfrontal n'est pas vraiment sollicité. C'est une autre partie du cerveau qui s'enclenche, qui est la partie plus de l'amygdale. Donc, beaucoup plus réactif et on ne réfléchit pas avant de parler. Donc, on peut être beaucoup plus on peut avoir des comportements qui sont souvent non acceptables lorsqu'on est dans cet état d'être-là. Donc, c'est important de vraiment s'observer et de vraiment s'assurer de notre état d'être avant d'entrer dans une relation de communication qui pourrait être difficile. And back to you, Lori, for the comments. I don't know if you've seen some of the comments and questions.
I did see some of them. Is there anything that's really standing out for you, France, that we might need to address?
Well, there's a question about Brad. On the other side, an employee who sees their manager favoring other employees by allowing them slack and doing their own thing. How does the employee have that difficult conversation? So I don't know if you...
So the employee would want to have a conversation with their manager?
Maybe Brad, if you want to put a bit more context around your question, how does that employee have that difficult conversation? The conversation about seeing an employee who has more favoritism, I guess. How do you address the situation with your manager? So please, Brad, give us a bit more context so Lori can address it. Donc, on a vu un commentaire aussi. There's a comment as well about the appeasing response is a response to experience abusive in other relationships which are transferred to the work I environment. So that's another comment about how it's a response to abusive behaviors.
Could be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What I was going to say is, so what our goal is to, and we can come back to that question, France, if Brad provides more information.
Yes.
Our goal is to be able to set the stage ahead of time so people aren't coming in to see us to have this difficult conversation in that heightened, triggered state. So one of the things that a colleague shared with me recently was we actually, there's a ratio of 5-to-1. So if you know you have to have a difficult conversation, one of the techniques is to look for positive things and to actually acknowledge and recognize that person for a couple of weeks before you have to bring them in to have a difficult conversation. So it's like we shift our perspective as leaders because we start looking for the things that are going right instead of going wrong. And we are able to shift that.
I'm going to jump in
to build up our trust with that person if they feel. Oh,
Lori, you're cutting off a bit.
Cutting out, or are you losing my? Yes. Okay, I'm not sure if it's the connection or what. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's bandwidth. Lori, maybe you want to turn off your video. We can just try that for a few minutes so that we can hear you, because you are what I call chipmunking, slowing down and speeding up.
Slowing down and speeding up. Okay,
bandwidth.
let's see if I can turn off my video here. Okay, so I'm not sure how much to go back over what I just said. France, do you want to translate some of that?
Yeah, what I can do is translate the option. What you mentioned, Lori, was about the 5-to-1 ratio. Donc,
yes.
un truc important qui a été offert par Lori dans un contexte où on est peut-être dans un état réactif et on doit prendre en main cette conversation-là difficile. Il y a le ratio du 5-pour-1 qui est un exercice très intéressant où on va se rappeler des éléments positifs de la personne ou de la situation dans un ratio plus élevé, donc le 5, avant 5 éléments positifs, par rapport à la situation, la personne, avant même d'aborder un élément négatif. Donc, ça va nous mettre comme personne dans un meilleur état, donc de nous ramener vers un peu plus la droite du schéma qui est dans un état d'être qui est beaucoup plus posé, concentré et où on engage justement le cortex préfrontal. So, Lori, I just explained the 5-to-1 ratio.
Great. Okay. So I think we'll move on. And did we get any more information from Brad about his question?
So Brad just wrote down something. So how does an employee approach their manager about perceived favoritism to other employees when that manager challenges all employees in an open forum to perform, citing that failure to do so will lead to harsh repercussion? How does an employee then say to their manager that it is obvious of the manager allowing a select few to do their own thing with no threat?
Super difficult conversation, and I'm not sure I have an answer for Brad, sorry. But if you think about this dashboard and you think about the level of trust in the relationship, the one-on-one relationship you have with your manager, and where you feel safe to share what you need to share, think about it as having a conversation and building rapport, I guess.
I love the question that Brad has. So it's how do you shift your perception using the 5-to-1 ratio too, Lori?
Absolutely.
You offered a great advice. It's okay. You're seeing the one thing that he's doing, or maybe a few things that he's doing wrong. How can you shift your perception to put yourself in the right mindset to address or have the conversation?
Absolutely. Where do you find yourself on this dashboard? And what are you looking for and listening for that's good versus just bad?
Thank you, Lori.
Okay.
We'll move on. And
sure.
Yes, address maybe one question. Yes, there's a few slides that Lori graciously added to the presentation, which is awesome. But yes, the version you have on the website might differ a bit. We will upload the new slides after this presentation today. Give us 24 to 48 hours to do so.
Thank you. So the other part of having difficult conversations and coaching for performance is knowing what it is, what the issue is, and what the solution to the issue is. So if you're thinking about a performance issue, and we talked a lot of the ideas that were coming up were around more behavioral kinds of things, but maybe it's a training issue. Maybe the person doesn't have the skills they need to get better at whatever it is you need to get better. Maybe through discussions with your employee, you realize that they are having some personal problems, and maybe there's a referral to counseling that's required. Negative attitudes is difficult, but coachable if you're willing to address those concerns as you come up. So this diagram shows kind of a range of issues that you might need to address with folks. And coaching isn't always the only answer, but I believe that to really empower someone to want to change their behavior, you have to meet them at that coaching level. So this diagram shows the different kinds of issues for you to be thinking about. What is the main issue and how might I want to address it?
Thank you, Lori. And you have a few good questions that I invite you to take a look at
okay.
while I'm doing the French.
Sure.
Donc, ce qui est important ici, c'est un très bon tableau qui démontre, en fin de compte, quand un employé peut démontrer différents comportements difficiles, Il y a plusieurs sources, il y a plusieurs raisons possibles, mais il y a aussi plusieurs techniques possibles et le coaching n'est pas nécessairement la seule méthode préconisée. Donc, la personne peut avoir besoin de plus de structure, de formation, peut avoir besoin d'un mentor, peut avoir besoin aussi d'être confrontée sur certaines attitudes ou comportements qui sont inacceptables. Donc, évidemment, ce tableau-là vous démontre un peu des pistes d'action possibles pour savoir à quel niveau intervenir et comment intervenir ou même qui faire intervenir. Ce que Lori mentionne, c'est qui est très important, par contre, selon son opinion, le coaching amène les gens vraiment à être habilités à se transformer et vouloir changer ou se transformer. Donc, le coaching est quand même une méthode très, très préconisée pour que la personne puisse se prendre en main. Lori, have you seen the questions about 2 weeks? I think you mentioned something in the 5-to-1 ratio, and someone
Yes.
mentioned. Yes, have you seen it?
Yeah, I was just looking at those. So yeah, and I think we're gonna touch on that when we get to the coaching process right away. But I wasn't suggesting you hold off on having a discussion for 2 weeks, but I was, there's usually always a gap between when things start to really boil up and when you have a discussion. And the suggestion is that we need to somehow shift our perception away from just looking for what people are doing wrong towards looking for what people are doing right. And so by looking for what people are doing right, we're able to acknowledge some of those things in the conversation that we're going to have with them, where we want to discuss what's not working as well.
That's so of a good point. How do we do that? And I'll explain in French afterwards. How do you do that when you're emotionally charged, Lori?
Really hard. That's where, when we think about the coaching process and the GROW model, and that very first G, which I'm going to get to right away, is we have to check in with ourselves. If we're on the right side of the dashboard, then we're not in the right frame of mind to have the discussion either, because we're just solely focused on what's going wrong, and we might be a little bit angry or ticked off or whatever.
Thank you, Lori. I'll explain in French. Donc, une des questions qui a été posée, c'est vraiment quand la conversation doit avoir lieu, surtout si on est dans un état un peu négatif. Elle avait mentionné le 2 semaines. Et le 2 semaines, ce n'est pas nécessairement 2 semaines que ça prend, mais c'est d'être conscient de l'état d'esprit dans lequel on est. Si on est vraiment à la gauche du tableau dans un état très réactif et qu'on n'est pas capable de voir les points positifs de la personne, et même si on est conscient de l'élément qui doit être corrigé, c'est important d'être dans un état d'esprit et surtout émotionnel qui nous amène à être capable d'avoir la conversation difficile. Donc, vraiment, le point de départ, c'est de mesurer où nous en sommes et de prendre le temps qu'il faut pour être capable de voir les bons coups de la personne ou les bons coups de la situation pour ensuite être capable d'intervenir. Et je sais que Lori va mentionner un petit peu plus loin d'autres éléments en lien avec aussi l'utilisation du modèle BROP, qui pourrait être vraiment un outil très, très, très utile pour vous aider à vous préparer. OK, back to you, Lori.
Okay, let's move on, because I have another slide here which might help think about this issue as well. So where do we focus our attention? And that's what we were just talking about. We can get stuck in focusing our attention solely on what's going wrong. Where is this person messing up? Where am I finding the evidence to say that they've got an issue that needs to be addressed? So what we tend to do is we tend to focus our attention on what we see, what's observable, the tip of the iceberg that's outside of the water. Sometimes we see behaviors which are just slightly below the surface of the water, but rarely do we take the time to dig all the way down to the bottom of the iceberg to explore the emotions and the thinking for ourselves, but also for what might be going on for the other person.
Thank you,
France?
Lori. Mhm. Alors, ce qui est important, ce tableau-là va vraiment vous démontrer ce que vous mettez de l'attention. Alors, est-ce que c'est vraiment la partie haut du iceberg, qui est plutôt les conséquences, les résultats, ce que vous observez, et ce qui est des fois un petit peu plus camouflé se trouve plus et invisible se trouve vers le bas du iceberg. Donc, toute la partie plus émotionnelle, ce que je pense, comment je me sens, puis peut-être les habitudes aussi qui se retrouvent un peu entre les deux. Donc, c'est important de faire ça non seulement pour vous, mais aussi pour un peu comprendre la personne, l'autre personne aussi, où est-ce qu'elle se situe en regardant ce iceberg-là. Back to you.
So I wanted to share an example of this with you, perhaps. And my example is, maybe you have a 25-year employee that's been a great employee for all of their career. And then all of a sudden they start making major mistakes, missing work. And you have conversations with them, they commit to improving, but you don't see any behavior change. Improvement's actually quite minimal. What would you be thinking as a leader in that kind of a situation? And if you would mind putting some thoughts in the chat box, that would be great.
Alors, peut-être un exercice que Lori vous demande de faire, c'est d'un peu analyser cette situation-là qu'elle vous donne, ou un exemple. Un employé qui a toujours été excellent à son travail, plusieurs années. I think you mentioned 30 years, Lori? How many years?
Yeah, 20, 30 years, whatever. Long-term employee.
A long-term employee, donc un employé qui est là, ça fait longtemps, qui a toujours bien fait les choses, et là, il se met à commettre plusieurs erreurs, n'est plus présent, s'absente beaucoup, et vous notez que son comportement a vraiment changé. Quelles seraient vos premières impressions de cet employé-là? And Lori, you're starting to have a lot of comments.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just having a quick look at the chat here for sure. So there's something else going on in that situation. In my particular example, the person's brother was murdered. So of course they're distracted from their work. They're grieving. They want to work because they want to focus their attention on something positive, but they're not completely healthy enough to be working and to be there. So, it's digging beneath the surface and figuring out what's going on and how we can support that person in the short term to get through. I also noticed in the chat people talking about getting close to retirement. And I think that when we start to get close to retirement, we shift our focus, and our focus isn't on work anymore. So those can be really difficult conversations too. But if we dig in and use a coach approach, which we're going to go through right away, we might be able to help that person re-engage.
Merci, Laurie. Et l'effet surprenant, dans le cas de l'exemple que Laurie vient de vous donner, la personne en question, son frère avait été assassiné. Donc, c'est une situation réelle. Alors, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire pour supporter quelqu'un dans l'immédiat qui vit quelque chose de difficile comme ça? Et comment est-ce qu'on peut faire pour l'aider? Cette personne avait besoin de travailler, mais elle était évidemment préoccupée par tout ce qui s'était passé, qui est très traumatisant. Donc, on doit vraiment être en mesure de bien supporter et d'amorcer la conversation avec ces gens-là pour savoir comment les supporter. Et je sais que Lori va vous faire vivre l'expérience sous peu en utilisant le modèle BROP.
The thing that we need to remember is we can make all sorts of assumptions about what we think might be going on for that person, but we don't really know unless we ask the questions to get at the root of what's going on. I want to go ahead, translate that, and then I'll...
Because it's so powerful.
Okay.
Ce qui est important vraiment ici, c'est qu'on peut imaginer toutes sortes de raisons pourquoi la personne agit de la sorte. basé sur nos perceptions, nos observations, mais on ne le saura jamais tant et si longtemps qu'on ne réussit pas à avoir la conversation avec la personne et vraiment d'élucider la situation. Donc, je pense que ce qui est important à retenir ici, c'est on peut imaginer plein de choses, mais l'important, c'est de savoir comment aller chercher la vérité. Alors, Lori, back to you.
So I have this 2-column activity here on the right of the screen, and it's a really easy way for you to get clear for yourself on what you're thinking versus what you might want to say to the person. So you just take a piece of paper and make 2 columns and write down what you might want to say to the person versus what you think on the other side, because we don't always say what we think. And then you're able to check in with yourself to ask yourself, what do I know to be true? What are my assumptions or perceptions around this? Where could I be wrong?
That's so powerful. Alors, l'exercice que Lori vous suggère, c'est de vraiment faire une activité de rédiger deux colonnes avec les 2 questions suivantes. Qu'est-ce que je me dis par rapport à la situation et qu'est-ce que je pense? Parce que parfois, on n'a pas l'alignement entre les 2. Et cet exercice-là va vraiment vous permettre de mettre sur papier quelles sont vos perceptions par rapport à la situation, ce qui est idéal aussi, puisque vous pouvez aussi mentionner qui serait plus positif dans un cas d'une activité comme ça. In the chat, Lori, there are a few questions about that's why we have employee assistance program to refer to for access to services. Yes, you don't have to play all the roles, Lori, but what portion do you take versus what portion do you refer? What would be your recommendation for this question or comment?
Well, if you feel like you've dug deep and you've established a clear understanding of what might be getting in your staff members' way or what might be the issue for them, then you obviously, like in my mind, the services are there so you can refer them. You can't make them take, use the services that we have available as employees, but you can definitely refer them. And you can strongly refer them too.
Merci, Lori. So in the case where someone needs the EAP program, as
Yes.
a leader, you need to be able to refer them. Donc, si quelqu'un a vraiment besoin d'assistance, vous n'avez pas à jouer tous les rôles, mais je pense que c'est votre rôle de pouvoir vraiment bien les référer. But my big question for you is how much, Lori, do you take on? And I know we have the practice to do, but how much do you take on when you're not comfortable in that space as a leader? And you know there's the confidentiality and all this information that sometimes you think you're trespassing. How much of this situation do you address versus you refer? Can you just give us some guidance on that?
Well, I think the workplace is shifting because as we get more informed about mental health, as leaders and as employers, we have more of an obligation to provide services to help our employees. And I mean, this year of COVID, I'm sure there's so many more issues that have cropped up around this that feel personal. Do I go into that space with someone, but at the same time, the personal impacts the work. So there's a balance there. But I think we need to do our due diligence as leaders, as employers as well, to get people the support that they need.
Merci.
That's my perspective.
I'll repeat maybe in French. Alors, ce qui est important, c'est en termes de référence, à quel moment est-ce qu'on entre dans la référence vers un programme d'aide aux employés versus à quel moment on doit aussi investiguer, poser des questions. Et parfois, la ligne est mince entre poser trop de questions qui va entraver la vie personnelle des gens. Donc, bref, la recommandation de Lori, c'est qu'avec aussi tout ce qui se passe et l'ouverture en lien avec les dynamiques de santé mentale ou les les problématiques de santé mentale des gens, surtout en temps de pandémie, ce qui s'est passé cette année. Il est important d'être très ouvert par rapport à ces situations-là et comment aussi ça transforme et ça change et ça se transforme dans le milieu de travail. Donc, on n'a pas vraiment le choix de trouver des stratégies pour être un peu plus ouvert et d'être capable d'en discuter dans le milieu de travail. Lori, there's a nice word in the chat about empathy is the key.
Mm-hmm.
So I think your model really helps also foster a bit more empathy at work, but with the structure.
Yes, yes, that's great. Okay, so let's talk about a coaching process, the coaching process. So we have the GROW model, and folks are familiar with the GROW model, or some folks may be. Is that right, France?
Yes, at the Canada School Public Service, for those who don't know, we have a course and we offer the coaching model, the GROW coaching model in that coaching for effective leadership course. So yes, a few of those have been introduced to. There's also in the leadership programs for executives or new executives, there are references to the GROW model as well.
Okay, great. So what I'd like to do is just kind of walk through each of the letters in the acronym and just talk about how you might step into a performance conversation using this model. Sound okay?
Alors, Lori va vous faire vivre une expérience de coaching, une conversation en utilisant le modèle BROP. Et je tiens à préciser, parce que je l'ai mentionné en anglais, le modèle BROP est utilisé dans les cours de l'École de la fonction publique, entre autres un des cours qui est un coaching pour un leadership efficace, ainsi que différents programmes pour les nouveaux cadres à l'école. On utilise souvent ce modèle-là. Donc, c'est un modèle familier pour plusieurs de l'ensemble de la fonction publique. Go ahead, Lori.
Okay, so the G is for goal. And when we think about the goal of our conversation, that's where we want to do some of this pre-work and get very prepared ourselves for the discussion. And also to invite your employee in to have a discussion in a way that they're not going to feel threatened right away. So it's knowing what's true, what you've observed, but getting really curious also about what's going on for the other person, as we've already talked a little bit about. So what can you do to set the stage for a conversation where you will both be seen, heard, and understood? And we don't have to worry about that amygdala hijack. So when we figure out a goal for our conversation, we have an idea of what we want to talk about, and that's our 50% of the conversation. But at the same time, we need to get curious about what the other person is going on. So maybe it means having a conversation that might start by thanking the person for taking the time to meeting with you. Noticing, if there was an example where you noticed something in a meeting the day before, you might say, I noticed yesterday in the meeting you weren't quite yourself. And on a couple of other occasions, I noticed you struggling to meet deadlines. We've been working together for a long time and I'm familiar with your habits. Something's different. What's going on? Get really curious when you're introducing the topic to your employee, and ask questions that you don't know the answer to. And that's why we want to do some of that pre-work that we talked about. Listen, stay curious, just ask questions and acknowledge what you heard as you're trying to get a good handle on what the topic or the goal for the conversation might be. Over to you, France.
Thank you, Lori. And look at the chat. There are a few great comments about when to refer, and maybe reference as well that, we can't make the choice for them, and you're not a therapist. So maybe find some great answers for the people who might be in that position. Alors, le modèle gros, le G est vraiment pour le but. C'est dans le modèle GROW, c'est en français, c'est le BROP. Alors, G, c'est plutôt un B en français, donc le but, définir le but. Et quand vous allez avoir la conversation aussi avec la personne, l'important d'être dans d'un espace de curiosité, de poser des questions où vous n'avez vraiment pas les réponses et que vous êtes dans un espace aussi, I'm throwing the word out here, Lori, about non-judging, d'être dans un espace de non-jugement aussi. Have you mentioned the other letters besides the G? Because I
Nope,
was monitoring.
I'm
No,
on
okay.
the G, so we're
All
going to
right.
go on.
Perfect. Donc, restez vraiment dans cet espace-là où vous allez vraiment aider la personne à définir son but ou le but de la conversation. And back to you, Lori.
Yeah. Okay, so if we look at R is for reality checking. What do we know about the situation? What do we believe is going on? By exploring the reality together, we can get all the perspectives on the table. So we know what our perspectives might be, but what are the perspectives of the other person and what's causing them to react or behave in the way that they're behaving. So again, we want to establish a common understanding of the situation. And as leaders, we have our view, but remember that's 50% of what's actually going on. We don't know the other half, what the other person's perspective is. So again, here's some of the techniques you can use is again, listening, careful listening and questioning, reflecting back what you believe you heard, because in everything we hear, we attach our own experience to. So what you believe you heard, make sure you heard it correctly. Clarify any assumptions that you or they may be jumping to, and ensure you both fully understand the situation from both perspectives before moving on. So R is for reality checking.
Thank
Do you
you,
know
Lori.
your own thinking and the other person's thinking?
Let me stop you there because my memory is going to play tricks on me.
Sorry.
Donc, le R, c'est vraiment pour la partie réalité. Ce qui est important, c'est vraiment d'être capable, avec la conversation de coaching, d'être capable d'être dans un espace de conversation. Vous allez poser des questions très ouvertes, des questions aussi non jugeantes, où la personne va se sentir confortable de partager des éléments de sa réalité. Et aussi d'aller mesurer aussi ses réflexions, ce qui se passe, mais aussi d'aller chercher plutôt ses perceptions aussi, parce que n'oubliez pas, ce n'est pas vous qui avez nécessairement toute la vérité, mais d'aller chercher la perspective de l'autre, c'est ce qui est très important pour enfin avoir une réalité commune, de comprendre les deux la même chose. So, G, R, and there's two more letters, and I see the time. I just want to be mindful of the time. We're near 11:30, so I'm just throwing this out there.
Yep, for sure. So I will go through the next two letters, and I think I have one more slide, and then we'll be able to jump into the coaching demo.
Great.
So always for options and obstacles. So what you want to do in this part of the process is make sure you uncover all the possible options for improvement. So things that you see, but also mostly ideas that your client, your employee has. You have your ideas, but when we talk about telling versus asking, people are going to appease and say, okay, but there's things that will get in their way from actually moving ahead. So in the coaching process, the best way is to get the employee to come up with their own options. What do they think they can do differently? And also to identify their obstacles, what's going to get in their way, and how can you support and help clear the way for them to be able to shift their behavior appropriately.
Lori, and I think it also addresses how maybe a manager who's not in charge of the personal life of the employee who might need an EAP, that option, or obstacles discussion will be very valuable in the context of making sure that the person is aware of the options that she has or he has, and being able to address it. So I think it might be a good way to address the situation or the question around, it's not my option, it's not my decision, it is the decision of the employee. So
Right.
thank you for that. En français, le O consiste pour obstacle ou opportunité ou option. Donc, dans la conversation, c'est important de faire parler la personne sur quels sont les obstacles qu'elle a présentement, sur les options qui se présentent à elle pour qu'elle soit capable de faire un choix éclairé éventuellement, mais d'être capable d'en parler pour que la personne puisse vraiment avoir une idée claire, puis d'être capable de le partager avec vous ou de l'entendre. Donc, pour vous qui êtes un gestionnaire, très important d'avoir un processus ouvert entourant à la discussion autour des options et des obstacles possibles de la personne. And I'll stop there, Lori.
Okay, so let's go on to the W then. W is the will to change. And this is important because change is difficult. Changing behaviors is difficult. Changing mindsets is difficult. Changing beliefs is difficult. So during this stage of the process, you want to find out where is the energy coming from for your employee to move from where they are today to where they need to be. So and is it like fear motivated? If we're just telling them they have to change, then it's going to be fear motivated and we're not going to see the change we desire. What we need to do is somehow get them to share what they need to renew their motivation, to renew their engagement, and find a sense of pride back in their work. What are some of the things that they would like to do that would help them feel energized to get to where they need to go? And then finally, what are the commitments that are being made? What is your employee committing to? And one of the coaching techniques that I love to share with leaders is ask your employee to tell you what they're going to do differently or what actions they're going to take. Because if as the leader, we just repeat back to them what we think they should do, we don't have their engagement or commitment fully.
Thank you. And I've put some the words in French for the BROP, the GROW model. Le W, c'est pour will. It's will in English, but in French it's slightly different. But we can also use the V for volonté.
Okay.
Mais en même temps, le BROP, c'est vraiment la planification de la mise en œuvre des actions que la personne va choisir, ses options. Puis ce qui est important, c'est de voir, comme Lori disait, le changement demande de l'énergie. C'est de savoir l'énergie provient de où, puis les motivations viennent de où, puis est-ce que la personne a l'énergie suffisante pour changer et veut suffisamment pour changer, parce qu'elle a beau avoir plein d'options, si elle n'a pas la volonté de vraiment le changer, ça mènera à rien. Donc, pour vous qui est gestionnaire ou qui aurez à avoir ces conversations-là, d'être capable de discuter de la volonté de changer ou de la motivation à changer ou de l'énergie que la personne a pour mettre en place son plan d'action, ce sera super important. Surtout dans un but d'amener la personne à penser et réfléchir à où est-ce qu'elle se situe présentement et où est-ce qu'elle veut vraiment aller. Donc, votre conversation de coaching sera très importante et cette étape-là, surtout, de mesurer la volonté encore plus importante. Back to you, Lori.
So I was just, France, looking at a comment in the chat box here about that says, you know, by asking the person what they're going to do, it's the manager saying it's not my problem. It's saying it's your problem. So they're suggesting some self-reflection on the part of the manager as to what they might be able to do differently. And I totally agree. I think it is the employee that needs to take full ownership of their performance. And it's the manager's job to motivate and engage them and give them the tools they need to be successful. So as a manager, if you're not getting the results you want, then what might you need to do differently? And so when we think about using a coach approach, maybe figuring out how you could use more of a coach approach in those performance discussions might help you get a better result.
Thank you, Lori. Donc, si vous êtes un peu, comme on regarde les commentaires, Lori, ce qu'elle mentionne, c'est que si vous êtes le gestionnaire et que vous voyez effectivement que l'employé, sa responsabilité, c'est de prendre les décisions, de faire en sorte qu'elle se mobilise pour atteindre et pour que sa performance soit excellente. Par contre, vous, comme gestionnaire, vous devez vous poser la question, si je n'ai pas l'engagement entier de mon employé, si sa motivation n'est pas à son maximum, qu'est-ce que je dois faire pour changer et transformer ma façon d'intervenir avec cette personne-là? Et là, le modèle de coaching proposé par Lori peut être vraiment une nouvelle façon de faire qui pourrait être mise en place. Alors à vous, back to you, Lori.
Thanks. Okay, on our next slide, we have this diagram, ask versus tell. And given the time, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but taking different approaches to how we work with and deal with employees, given what's going on for them, can move us from a more controlling approach to a more empowering approach. And so certainly when we move to the right side of this diagram, where we're sometimes making suggestions and we're asking questions and we're paraphrasing and we're listening, by asking those questions, we're giving more power back to the individual to be able to make those decisions that they need to make to improve their performance. So there's definitely a time when we need to tell what and how, particularly when someone's new. And sometimes people come to us for just advice. But as we move over to the empower side of the dashboard, asking questions and using a coach approach will help you get there.
Thank you. En français, donc, ce que Lori vous partage ici à l'écran, c'est vraiment un modèle qui part d'un aspect de contrôle vers plutôt être capable d'habiliter les gens avec qui doivent se rapporter à nous. C'est sûr qu'il y a un spectrum que vous pouvez suivre, donc entre dire quoi faire, offrir des conseils et ensuite aller plus vers une technique de coaching qui est plus poser des questions, paraphraser, qui est beaucoup plus mobilisante. Mais évidemment, vous devez probablement faire un peu du test, tester ces différentes approches-là selon différents contextes. Mais effectivement, c'est vers la droite qu'on tend à vouloir aller, surtout dans le cas où on veut vraiment mobiliser, donner du pouvoir aux gens ou les habiletés à se transformer parce que cet aspect-là, c'est vraiment, ça appartient à la personne. Mais c'est votre approche qui va amener la personne dans cet état d'être-là. Lori, your turn.
Hi. Okay. So our next slide then is just a little quick little tool that you can keep in your back pocket. It's called TED, and really it's all about just asking those open-ended questions to get more information, to find out what's really going on. Dig below the surface to the bottom of that iceberg with your folks that you're talking to. And you can use this in any kind of conversation by just saying, tell me more about that, or explain more about that situation. Every time you ask this question, people will peel back another layer and give you a little bit more information. So don't just ask a question once and be done with it. Keep probing to get more information.
Merci. Alors, ce que vous devez garder dans votre poche arrière, c'est la technique TED, vraiment d'être capable de poser des questions, donc de demander « tell me more », donc en savoir plus, en français c'est le CED, « explain more about that », donc demander plus d'explications à la personne au sujet, n'hésitez pas à demander des questions et plus de questions et différentes questions aussi, et décrivez encore « describe more about how you saw the situation », donc décrivez plus en détail la façon dont vous percevez la situation. Donc, allez chercher vraiment l'aspect perceptuel et les pensées de la personne, puis d'être capable d'en parler. Alors,
Great.
à vous, Lori.
Thanks, France. Is there anything coming up in the chat that we need to, great acronym, terrific, good.
There's a comment about anti-racism. I'm wondering where anti-racism fits into the module. And unconscious bias training for managers. We also do a rethink of our normative assumptions and how we see our employees. So that was a comment.
So do you see that as just a comment? Yes, thank you for sharing. Good. And you know, that whole idea around unconscious bias goes back to checking in with yourself. What are your assumptions, your perceptions? Where are your biases and beliefs coming up? And how is that impacting the conversation that you're planning to have with your staff member? Okay, so we're at the demonstration time now. So I'm going to ask Barbara, Barbara, did anyone volunteer? And I'm going to stop sharing as well.
Yes,
yeah, I think it's Evelyn.
We have Evelyn, yes. Evelyn, I'm going to come and get you and ask you to talk first. So you are allowed to talk. Unmute yourself. You'll find the microphone in the lower left-hand corner of the screen.
Just to clarify, Lori, this practice will be only in English. So I will let you with Evelyn on the screen and I will just disappear. But thank you for this lovely presentation, and I'll just conclude whenever this is done. Okay?
Okay, thank you, France. Hi, Evelyn. Thank you for joining me.
You can hear me?
I can hear you.
Perfect.
Do you have a working camera? Are you willing to come on camera?
Just 1 second, Lori and Evelyn. I have to make Evelyn a panelist. I'm happy.
Okay.
Okay. That's our first step. Now just stay patient for 2.5 seconds. You are zooming over to our dark side with Lori. You can still talk, and now you can start your video. Okay. There we go.
There we go. Hi, Evelyn. It's so nice to meet you.
Yes, of course. Now I've got to fix my hair and everything else.
Thank you for volunteering. I really appreciate that. So we have about 10 to 15 minutes here today. We'll have to keep track of the time. So we have a few minutes left to close the workshop. But what would you like to chat with me about today? What's coming up for you?
I do frequent mentoring with the Federal Internship for Newcomers program.
Okay.
However, I find that I am either slipping or the circumstances become coaching situations as well. So it's not only providing that formal advice, but also really trying to understand them as people and them as potential employees and whether this is a good fit for them. That's a bit more of the mentorship side. But I find that the reason I took this on was like I wanted to hear about what is being said in coaching, is I really wanted more tools on the coaching side. Because these people are unique people coming as newcomers, a lot of the assumptions that we have as Canadians and our long-term permanent residents, that we are acculturated, they don't have the same basics. So when they come into the workplace, they are dislocated in trying to transfer their skills, of which they are very proud of, and of course have. Some of these people have PhDs, but at the same time, they also, there's a dislocation where they're trying to find themselves and need advice about that, which is why I was curious. I'm the one who said about the anti-racism, because it's negotiating some of that territory in working in various workplaces, which may or may not match their skills or their education.
So Evelyn, let me stop you there for a moment. So what I'm hearing you say is that you're working with newcomers to Canada, and you're usually in a mentor role, but you're discovering that it might be valuable to take on more of a coaching role, so you could dig a little deeper to find out, what's getting what's happening for folks. I'm on the right track so far.
Yes, exactly.
What would be most helpful for you to walk away with today from our conversation?
Well, I've been curious throughout the conference about the fine line between mentorship and coaching, and whether the two are so distinct that you cannot pull apart.
Yeah.
So, and then secondly, once kind of having advice on where that line is, that how I can best use coaching to supplement without it becoming a personal relationship with the person, because sometimes they're so hungry for that personal touch, that somebody cares about them and that is interested in their career development, that they start seeing me as a friend. And there's also a limit of what I can do in relation to that. So that is the kind of, and I think this is though true of any mentoring or coaching relationship where there's a differential, a senior to a more junior, all of a sudden you become the referee and you become, you know, so there, how do we keep those lines distinct and protect our own boundaries and own like I'm having cookies delivered to me tomorrow, and I appreciate it. And it comes from the heart, and I do not want to be rude, but I also need to establish boundaries. So it's tools for coaching that I can appropriately bring in, plus also boundaries. And also like, where does that continuum balance?
It sounds, Evelyn, like one of your very unique strengths is to build really strong, trusting relationships with people, which is just a wonderful place to start for them. Absolutely. And so I'm curious, where do you see the difference between mentoring and coaching based on what you know?
Well, in my training, in my past, was an academic training. So I do notice, for example, there is a different even tone of voice when I move in to the telling, to the directed knowledge. I am sharing knowledge with you about the how the government works, how departments work, how hiring works, what is expected from the manager, what can you look to your manager for and what you cannot look to your manager for. So I noticed there's a voice change. And then when I see the deer in the headlight look on the person, then I automatically switch into the coaching and go, did you understand that? Or would you like me to explain something more? Or does this make sense in your context? I'm moving to the personal.
Right. Right. So getting curious, what I hear you say is by shifting to questions, you're getting curious about what's going on for the person, what might be the obstacles getting in their way.
Yes.
Yeah. So you mentioned a shift in tone of voice and, you know, the way, tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, some of the mentorship aspects is really transferring knowledge. And what I tend to quote unquote lecture the most about is, if I can put that terminology on it, is, for example, basic information. And it's for students too and newcomers, anybody who's entering the public service new. Is, or any job, but while speaking of public service, is did you know that there are categories or classifications? That there are ECs and PMs and ISs and CRs, and what do you know about that? Oh, nothing. You just don't have a job. Okay, no, each job has specific skills and competencies, and this is what it means, and that this is the difference. And then in the future, in our mentoring, we will decode a poster so that you understand in applying what each means in the context of the classification. But even now, you might be able to sense somewhat of a different tone.
Yeah,
that I'm
absolutely. I am certainly, and it's so interesting because, and I'd like to share a perspective here with you, if I might. when you tell, we get that shot of oxytocin. It feels good for us to tell someone about something. To empower the other person, we have to step into the ask. And as I mentioned before, ask in the workshop, ask questions we don't have answers to.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking about asking versus telling, and in mentoring, we absolutely are sharing information on our experience. In coaching, we're trying to get better feel for what the other person is going through.
Yes.
So where do you think you feel more comfortable?
As an empathetic, compassionate person, I feel comfortable in both. I just worry that I do not, that again, in that slippery slope, initially it's a professional relationship or a semi-professional relationship of mentorship, and and then it starts slipping into coaching. And how can we help you get, like, if I ask you this question or would like you to reflect on what does values and ethics mean in the public service as a way of bridging the two, but then it becomes part of who you are. And it's the slippery slope. So I'm comfortable in explaining and knowledge transfer. I'm comfortable in supporting and being empathetic and trying to help the person find themselves in this new culture and environment in their chosen space. What I'm not comfortable with is not slipping into the friendship stuff.
Right.
Okay. So I feel comfortable in the first two, and the third one I'm not, but that's why I raised it in this kind of continuum context. But I feel comfortable in both.
Right. Okay, that's wonderful. It's the slipping. What I'm hearing you say is it's creating the boundaries to prevent you from slipping into friendships. And so when we move into friendships versus a professional relationship, what's the difference there? How do we treat that person differently?
Well, there's I'm the one also said about self-reflection for the manager. I respond, you can see it in the email conversations. I respond, they start saying, hugs, Evelyn, you're great. And I say, my pleasure, I'm just here to help. And then all of a sudden it starts moving into a different kind of closing and a different kind of greeting. So that's one of the ways that I can see that it actually concrete happening, not only, and then they start inviting me to things or gifting me things, and I accept and perhaps maybe in self-reflection, one of the things I might want to think about doing is say that, well, if you say that's not necessary, they'll say I insist. And but how can I can try to say, I don't know, just that's where I don't know how to.
So where is the boundary that would make you feel most comfortable?
I don't want to hurt the person. I don't want to getting them to a point where they're starting to feel good and feel like, yeah, this is good. This is a networking opportunity. I feel my refusal to continue the relationship or move beyond the coaching situation might hurt them and do damage. So that's not really an answer, but it is an observation.
Yeah, no. And what I'm hearing is your own need to be very helpful and to continue to be helpful for that person.
Yes.
What is the difference? What is the difference in your mind about being helpful and moving to the far right of that diagram where you're empowering that person?
Actually, that's a very good point, because when what I reflect now, when you've asked me the question like this, is that I can tell the difference is when I start talking about my personal life, not from a perspective of sharing my experiences, but letting me, even such a small thing as, oh yes, I have 2 cats and a dog. I've shifted the relationship to one of a more personal basis. And those are things, or I've read a good book, you know, those are things that I need to put a boundary on in order to keep it focused on them. So that's a very good, that's an important takeaway for me.
Great. So if you were going to, what might you do in terms of an act to put that into practice for yourself going forward?
Well, you're right, because my tendency is to gradually just taper off. For in the best of circumstances, that's when a person has found a job and they're happy. And then the second, so that I do it in a passive aggressive way, which is not helpful and not useful. So it really means I have to do that kind of personal sharing and keep it professionally oriented, as opposed to talking about my own personal life. So I can just start by not giving into the temptation to elaborate that element, you know. So I can do that proactively as opposed to passively, just by not answering. I can just say, you know, that I don't know how to do it, but I'll need to think about how to actually do it proactively as opposed to passively.
And what do you hope that will give you, Evelyn?
Some space, because I find that the more people I do mentor and or coach or mentor, the more people make demands on me personally that I can't fulfill all the time. And that means I give less to other people. And yes, that's one of the issues I'm finding. And then I feel bad, and it gets into a whole personal aspect, but so I need to handle it professionally and make those boundaries clear, and it's better for me and it's also better for them.
Great. Wow, you've done some great work in a very short amount of time here, Evelyn. Can you tell me the first thing you're going to put into place after our conversation here today?
Well, I think I'm still going to take the cookies, but no, because I can't not at this point, but that will be the end. But one of the things I'm going to do, I have a conflict, and I'm feeling guilty about the conflict, but my private life is my private life, and I'm going to I have a meeting at 4:30, usually it goes to 5:30. I'm going to say, I cannot make that appointment unless we shift it to 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock. And if that you can't make that, that's fine. We'll have to meet after Christmas or next week. But that is a proactive making a boundary on what I need to do. And then I have to go back and think of other people that I'm mentoring that I need to put that boundary before it even gets to this point.
Right.
Thank you so much, Lori.
Great work.
Can't believe
You're
it.
welcome. Thank you. Thank you for volunteering. You're great to coach you today, Evelyn. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I hope some people saw some of the challenges of and it's the same thing. I'm doing mentorship for newcomers, but it's the same thing with employees.
Yeah.
You have to find out where the boundaries are between yourself and the other person, but also I'd say lead from the heart.
Yeah.
If I have to.
For sure. Good. So I'd like to invite France and Barb to come back. We're going to close off the workshop now. And Barb is going to drop a link in the chat box for you to go to a Mentimeter, just to share some of the highlights of what you're taking away from our conversation, our presentation today. Over to you, France.
Thank you, Lori. And I want to acknowledge the time and your expertise. I think we really had a great demonstration of the GROW model. I was putting some of the
I saw
steps you
that.
were using in the chat, so just to make links with what people were observing. Donc, merci Lori pour le temps, l'expertise et cette super démonstration-là. On aime voir en vrai et entendre en vrai comment ça se passe dans la réalité. And for me, when I hear this, it's human. It's not complex. It's being in that open of sharing and listening. And you so much demonstrated that that skill, that being that you can use either as a coach, but also as a leader. Donc, n'attendez pas de vivre, d'essayer ces techniques-là. Vous avez le pouvoir d'utiliser ce muscle-là, that new muscle that you can practice using is called coaching, asking questions and listen differently. And you see the impact on the coachee, Evelyn, who was there. It's just beautiful to see people being empowered in a situation. So thank you, Lori, for your time again. Merci à tous d'avoir participé en grand. Thank you for your participation. And I'm sure we will just have more activities in the future that demonstrates the power of coaching. So thank you for your contribution, Lori. Et merci à Barbara d'avoir administré la plateforme encore une fois. And thank you, Evelyn, to be open and share with others a piece of your story and your life. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.